Today I'm going to talk about whether October is actually better than November. And I never would have dreamed that 10 years ago, but over the past several years, myself and my friends have killed a lot of really nice bucks in October. So it's starting to make me wonder that, have we been overlooking maybe the best month to kill the trophy whitetail? But before I get into that discussion, I want to introduce the second half of this episode. So if you remember back to the first episode of Bowhunting Whitetails, I took you to the farm. Well, I'm back at the farm today, and the food plot that was really struggling up on the ridge, just checked it, and it's still really struggling. The deer are mowing that thing off. If I don't do something up there, I'm not going to have very much food. There's going to be beans, but they're only going to be about 3 inches tall, and all the pods are going to be right on the ground, which produces something, but not nearly as much amount of forage as what you could get if you overseed it with a brassica. So I'm going to talk about that and really go through that at the tail end of this episode, how I do it and what that looks like. But right now, I'm going to jump into that discussion of whether October is actually better than November. Gosh, it wouldn't have been very long ago I wouldn't have even entertained this discussion, because I was such a believer that everything focused on the rut. You don't hunt in October very much because there's that risk that you're going to bump that buck that you're going to have a chance at in November. You're going to burn out some of your best tree stand locations. Somehow you're going to do damage to your chances of being successful in November. Well, little by little, over the past 10 years, that has changed. And it's not been necessarily just my experiences. A lot of people that I have a lot of respect for have had great success in October. So I started paying attention to that. Some of my friends were killing really good deer in October. Then I'm thinking, what am I missing here? So I started getting more serious about the month myself. And I think in order to say, is it better, we need to define what better is. So let's start there. If you define better as seeing lots of bucks on their feet moving, then November is better, because you got the rut, and that's got this testosterone levels up on all these bucks, and the woods are alive. Certain days in November, it's like, boy, you just turn the light switch on and bucks are everywhere. But if you're defining better as, I've got a certain buck that I'm trying to kill, and I want to get this buck, or maybe I won't shoot one this season, then it's a lot more of an interesting debate, because October has a lot to offer in that regard. Whereas November, the bucks are scattered. You're still going to find the odd one close to his core area, but a lot of times they're covering a lot of ground. That's wherever the hot doe takes them, wherever their search for the next hot doe takes them. They're not necessarily going to be around home as much. So kicking back to that, you're saying, okay, is October better? I think it's better if you're trying to, for a certain specific buck that you're trying to kill. I think November is better for shooting a buck. So let's kind of classify or clarify that right up front. I'm going to go into a lot more detail over the coming weeks in this series about exactly how to hunt October. And of course, we love talking about how to hunt November, but I want to spend more time talking about how to hunt October as we go along in this series. But let me start by saying there are some key points in October that are a green light, and you have to hunt October carefully. You can't just hunt all your best stands every day like you do in November and just expect good things to happen, because the bucks aren't moving like they do in November in October, but they're closer to home. So that's the attraction of October. And the other thing I like about October, if you want to define better, I love the weather. It's beautiful. I love the scenery. The leaves are turning. The woods just feel really, really good. They smell good. There's a fair amount of foliage still on the ground and up in the trees, so you can sneak around better. It's easier to get away with, being up in a tree and not getting seen. So there's a lot of things that are a benefit to October, but the main one, like I said, is the fact that the specific buck that you're hunting is going to be close to home. And I don't think we knew any of that stuff before the trail cameras. I'm not saying, I'm sure there were people who did. Let me just say that I didn't understand October well enough before I started running trail cameras, because there's so much that we can learn from the cameras, from the photos that we get from them, that tell us how and when to hunt October. And again, I'll get into that, in the coming weeks. But the point is, we are more successful now in October than what we ever have been in the past, and I attribute that to the fact that we know better how to hunt the month. We know better when to pull the trigger, when to be aggressive, when to be cautious. And since we're hunting the month more effectively, obviously our success rate is going to be higher. So if I go back now and I look at my own history here, like anecdotally, based on my experiences, in 16 I killed a really good buck in October, nothing in 17 and 18, killed a really good buck in October in 19, killed a really good one in 2020 in October, and messed up a chance on a really good one that I ended up killing later in 2021. I've talked about that deer, but I had him at 10 yards on the 29th of October. So I killed, in 16 I killed on the 18th of October, a really big deer that we called Lefty. And that buck was, I don't know why he was out there. I mean, that was really weird. It was a warm evening in the 70s that evening. He was the only deer that came out on that little cornfield that we were sitting on. So that was kind of a fluke, but I had daylight pictures of that buck on my trail cameras in that general area. I had a pretty decent idea where he was bedded because every time he approached the camera, he came from a certain direction in the evening. So I thought, well, he's bedding over in this little piece of timber over here. So that made him, at least in my mind, killable, even though it was mid-October on a 70-degree day. We can talk more about that buck at some point because there was more that went into, how I hunted and got fortunate to kill that deer than, what I have time for right here. Okay, so 2019 was, that was a deer that we called a surprise buck. And again, that was the 23rd of October. And that deer, I had history with that deer in that area, but not that year. So we weren't really there specifically hunting him, although, coming off the prior season, I was excited about that spot for that deer. He just hadn't shown up yet in 2019. So I'd kind of halfway written him off. So when he did show up, it was kind of a serious surprise. And that was, it was one of those jaw droppers, eyes pop open moments, So anyway, Drake Lamb was filming with me, and we both were shaken by the time that encounter was over with. That deer was, he came out, and he was going to grab a few bites to eat, but he was moving through. So he was just out checking. He was trying to see what does were in the area, maybe just check their status, just making, covering the rounds. Maybe he was going to hit a few scrapes. I don't know what his plan was for the evening, but he was on the move. Okay, so 2020, the very next year, killed a really good buck on, we'd sold the farm that spring, that summer. So I was hunting a new area, up closer to where my parents live. That deer, and again, I can spend a lot more time talking about him and how that all came together because that was a pretty cool hunt too. But this was a buck I knew of on trail cameras. I knew where he was probably bedding because of the direction that he came from in the evenings when he approached the camera. So I thought, well, he's probably up on this specific ridge over here. So I spent most of my time hunting him there, and he came past my tree on the 29th of October. It was a cold front, cooler temperatures, and he was only, 2.5 hours before the end of legal shooting time. He came through there. I think he was moving from where he was bedding deeper on the ridge to a spot further out on the ridge where he could, get closer to the food source before he dropped down into the valley, with the evening. So there's October 29th, 2020. So 2021, that was the buck I talked about last season. Well, same thing with him. I was hunting him in the same area where I knew from past experience that deer was most likely living. He came past on a trail, caught me, red-handed. It had rained that morning, so the leaves were really wet, and I didn't hear him coming. And he got in behind me and caught a little wind swirl and blew out. I was fortunate enough to kill that buck out of that same stand 2 weeks later. So we'll come back and talk about that too, because knowing what to do when you spook a buck makes it a lot easier to figure out, how to hunt that deer in the future. That's my own track record over the past 6 years. 4 bucks, and they were all really good deer, and they were all bucks that I was specifically hunting. The one was a surprise, but the other ones were bucks that I was hunting, and I think that the reason I was successful is because those deer hadn't moved away from their core areas yet. So the things that I'd learned about them from my trail cameras, those were things that I could take advantage of and actually harvest those bucks. So there's a lot more I can talk about here. I'm just kind of like the tip of the iceberg on putting that together in October. So I will come back. I don't know if it'll be next week, but sometime here in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to talk about, really how do you dial in October. And I know other people that have done really well, so I'll get some more insights from some of them. So that's going to wrap up this discussion. I'm going to move forward now to the rescuing my bean plot up on the ridge, and then I'll close up the episode after that. This is that field I was talking about where the deer have really scalped the beans. And I think it's because the soil quality isn't good enough that the beans are growing fast. So the deer are able to stay on top of them and keep them chewed down. You know, the food plot in the bottom, and we can take a look at that too, I guess, today, but that one the beans are doing really well. They're about, I don't know, a foot tall. Here they're about 4 inches tall, and you know, maybe a few taller ones. The only ones you see that are taller are the ones that are growing in the weeds where the deer can't find them, or at least not find them as easily. I don't think I've got tons of deer. I could be wrong. Maybe there's more deer here than I think, but it doesn't seem like I've got enough deer here to mow this field down. So it's got to be, like I said, something to do with the soil quality. My goal today is to go ahead and overseed this. I'm going to broadcast brassicas into this, which is your turnips, your radishes, dwarf Essex rape, some of these, you know, broad-leaved turnip family type of plants. And it's a small seed. So when I spread it, really a little bit of rain will be enough to incorporate it into the top layer of the soil. So I'll get seed to soil contact, and then it will, you know, you'll get the germination and it'll grow. You don't need to get it necessarily into the ground for this stuff to work. If you got a bigger seed, you can't really broadcast it that well because it stays dry, because it sits so far above the soil surface that it's a lot harder for a bigger seed to get enough moisture to germinate and get a root into the ground. Whereas these little bitty seeds, you know, you can incorporate them really quick into all this grass and in the top layer of dirt. So it should work. I just need the rain after I get this done. I'm going to spray first, kill all the weeds that are here. Just as soon as that herbicide is dry, which literally will take a couple of minutes today, I can come back and hand seed the brassicas into it, and then I'll check it in a few weeks and see if the brassicas have germinated. I've got a bunch of urea fertilizer, which is nitrogen, and I can spread that on here, but I don't want to do it now because if we hit a long dry spell, that urea is going to, you know, it's volatile, so it'll kind of evaporate and go into the air. You won't get the benefit of the nitrogen, and we may not get the brassicas to germinate, and you've wasted all that nitrogen anyway. So as soon as I've seen that the brassicas have germinated and started to grow, then I'll come back and hit this whole thing with some of the urea. I'm going to do roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 pounds actual per acre of the nitrogen. And that's not a heavy dose for these brassicas, but it'll be enough to really kickstart those plants. That's what I'm going to do here today, short of the fertilizer. I'm going to get sprayed, get seeded, and then I'll close out of the episode. Well, I've got that project pretty well wrapped up now. I need some rain and get these brassicas to germinate and jump up, and if they do, then I'll come back and fertilize it. But I picked a spot on the end of the field here where hopefully I've got some good tree stand locations and some decent winds that I can play. If it doesn't work, I can always bring one of those redneck blinds that I've got on the trailer up on top here. But I'm going to keep bringing these whitetail hunting focused episodes to you, and I appreciate you joining me this week, and I'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Bowhunting Whitetails. And remember to always dream big.